Welcome to Ask Psych Sessions with Marianne Lloyd, where we ask some of the best teachers we know questions from you, our audience. If you have a question or an idea for a conversation, please visit bit.ly/Ask Psych Sessions. That's bit.ly/Ask Psych Sessions. All one word, all lowercase. And here's our next question.
I'm here today with Sharda Umanoth from Claremont McKenna College. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to chat.
Well, what I would like for us to chat about today is one of those times that I'm selfishly interested in a question, which is that we've all pivoted into this, at best hybrid, but for most of us primarily remote teaching. But also, I think a lot of our listeners supervise undergraduate researchers, and I feel a little lost about what to do now that we're not having in-person lab meetings and testing participants in person. So I was hoping maybe you would tell us a little bit about your lab, and then we can kind of talk about how you've managed this transition.
Yeah, so I have an active research lab. Claremont McKenna is an entirely undergraduate institution, so all of my RAs are undergrads. And I've had anywhere from just two students all the way up to last semester I had 8 in the lab, which was awesome. But it's kind of an interesting management issue when you have so many students, some being paid, some taking kind of learning in the lab for credit. And yeah, it's been a wonderful experience. I think all of us, or many of us that were in grad school at some point, have worked with undergrads. So, in that sense, like we have some familiarity with it when we become faculty. And so in that sense, it wasn't too difficult a transition because they were a population I was already working with in that research capacity. At CMC, there's a big focus on doing research. And so, of course, having undergrads involved in our research. And so I'm lucky to have the infrastructure in place to have so many students and have folks excited to do research and learn about research. Yeah.
And so have you switched from doing most work in person to virtual?
Yes. So, we had to do that in the middle of the semester last semester. And, my research is on, among other things, aging. And so older adults were coming in and out of the lab. And even maybe a week or two before everyone got sent home, my students came to me and were like, what should we be doing? And I was like, you know what, let's just stop. Like this seems a little bit tenuous. Like we'll just wait it out and see what happens. It's okay. And they were very much on board with that because, once students start interacting with older adults, they become very protective of them, and it's kind of beautiful. And so for the rest of the spring, really it became, okay, well, let's just still have, lab meetings virtually over Zoom. We were still reading journal articles. My 2 honors thesis students kind of practiced their presentations and things like that. So we still had a few things to do. And over the summer, I spent a lot of time thinking, what do I do in the fall? I had several freshmen that were rising sophomores at that perfect time where I was like, oh my gosh, I can keep these students around for years. And that would be really wonderful. How do I keep them engaged, and the older students as well? And the way I pitched it to the students was, okay, this fall, like we're going to pause on data collection, and it's really going to be a different focus. We're going to think about what do we want to do next. So it's going to be more reading. It's going to be more brainstorming about kind of what we have done and what else we want to do. And so I kind of wanted to, often what I'm doing is directing the students in the research that I'm interested in or that I'm working on with collaborators. But this semester, I wanted to say to them, like, I want you to be part of the idea generation and development. So let's read and talk about what we would want to do next. And of course, there is certainly always a backlog of coding different things. And so some of the students are working on that remotely. But in addition, my older adult team that are really missing hanging out with my participants, came up with the idea of, well, Professor, could we make like a monthly newsletter? And, the first month could just be introducing ourselves and maybe giving the older adults in the community kind of resources to feel engaged, because they're so active normally, and I'm sure they're feeling really frustrated by this. So they compiled things like virtual museum visits and little blurbs about how to use Zoom and how to use FaceTime and things like that. And, for the next few months this fall, they want each newsletter to focus on a particular study, a paper that we've published that had older adults in it, and kind of translating that for the community. So, yeah, we're not really collecting data this fall, but I think it's going to be a really interesting semester for them, focusing on learning about really different things than we normally do.
That is so cool. And I'm trying to decide what part I want to focus on. Maybe, and then I want to go back to something you said in the beginning. But maybe we'll stick at the newsletter for a minute. What I really like about that is just the sort of, we talk sometimes about the skill-based training and the value of a liberal arts degree, that, writing and thinking about communicating science for a broader audience and also giving back. This, that literally, this feels like something that they would splash on the front page of the homepage of my institution, right? Like, this is really fantastic. And they came up with it on their own. So hopefully you're also encouraging them to be thinking about resume development, or if they're thinking about PhD programs as well. I don't know what your student mix usually is. Mine are much more likely to be workplace graduates. But did you predict you were going to also accidentally be doing career development in this way this semester?
Well, I didn't predict that, no, but I always really try to include them at every stage. But, usually that dissemination piece is them getting to come to Psychonomics or be on a poster. And, one of these particular students was going to come to Cog Aging with me in April, but of course that got canceled. And she was just devastated to not be able to go. And so I think this is a nice outlet for them, in the sense of, hey, we don't always only talk to scientific communities. We do want to talk to our participants and our local communities and be able to kind of translate the research. And you're right, most of my students typically don't go on to graduate school. But I am going to take a second to say that I had a really awesome conversation with one of my students just yesterday, who is a neuroscience major, and she was kind of trying to think about graduate school in cognitive neuroscience. And, I was just trying to get her to tell me what she actually wants to study, because she's been sort of vague about that. And, I was pushing her on it, and she was like, okay, finally, Professor Umanath, like, the only thing I really know is that I want to study aging. Like, my roommates are annoyed with me about how much I keep bringing up missing the older adults. So I think that's really all I know. And I've never had a student say that before. I haven't been teaching that long. This is my 6th year, but man, I was like full heart eyes emoji. Oh, it was so exciting.
Those are the super worth it moments.
Yeah.
Especially when you've had to just change the trajectory of what you're doing. Maybe let's pop back to, you use the funding word at the beginning of your talk. So is that, do you have some outside funding, or the university provides some funding? For those of us that maybe don't have funding, do you have any advice about how to find money?
Sure. So I got a really generous startup, which I'm just finishing up this year. And I'm really lucky that CMC has a fair amount of internal funding that we're allowed to apply for. And because of that, while we're encouraged to try for grants, there was never really, and I'm just on the cusp of, I'm up for tenure right now. And so in the process of annual report meetings and things like that, no one ever really said, you need to get a grant. But they said, if you want to fund the work you're doing and you need a grant, go for it. And I talked to my faculty mentor, now I guess almost 2 years ago, and asked, what do you think? There's this National Science Foundation Career Award. It's specifically for early career folks. I'm only eligible for it before I get tenure. Do you think I should apply? And he said, well, you know what? Like, I don't know whether you'll get it. You know, it's really hard. And I said, yes, absolutely. But, you know, I thought like it might be worth trying out just to hone my ideas. And he said, yeah, to hone your research program and think about, you know, your 5-year plan, like, why not think about it and also apply to this thing? And I'm really, really lucky to have just found out that I won one. So now, starting in June 2021, I put it off for a year because, of course, as I said, not really collecting data with older adults right now. But it'll start in June 2021, and it'll be funding my research for 5 years. And what's really special, I think, for folks that are at more teaching-oriented institutions or liberal arts colleges, is that half of the 15 pages you're supposed to write are about education and about teaching. And what they're looking for is for you to explain how you're going to translate the research you want to do directly into teaching initiatives. And I think that's something really special, and that for those of us at these kinds of institutions, it's really easy to sound sincere because we do care about teaching and we are really excited about those aspects. And so, yeah, I would encourage people to take a look at that grant, the NSF Career Grant, because I did not expect to win. And now I did. So this is going to be awesome. And I'll be able to fund student research assistants going forward. And I think that will also help me kind of broaden the field of who's able to work in my lab, because typically, you know, some students aren't able to work for credit due to their circumstances. And so this way, I'll be able to have students of all different, more varied backgrounds in my lab. So I'm really excited about that.
I mean, more greatness, right? Anything where you get to, right? Like you, I love that advice, right? You need to think about your research plan anyways. Why not think about it and also possibly get funding, but then also being able to bring in equity into the lab, I think that's great. Well, is there anything else that you would like to share with our listeners before we wrap it up today? I do think you've given us some good things to think about, some alternatives, even to data collection, working with our students, and some possibilities for funding. But was there anything else?
I don't think so. I mean, I think like part of it is just, at least for me with my students in the lab, because there are students that have worked with me before, I think they just really miss having that sense of community. And so if there's any way we can consistently meet, you know, they're so excited to be reading a paper for peer review, or just like hearing one of their classmates like talk about a project that they're working on, because I think they just miss each other. And so if nothing else, just having lab meeting, I think could be a great thing to support them outside of being teachers in the classroom.
That's great. All right. Well, thank you so much for your time, and have a good day.
Thanks.